and Chief Executive Officer of the Foundation for the Inclusion and Empowerment of Persons with Disabilities, a non-profit organization militating for disability inclusion in Cameroon and beyond. I am equally a doctoral candidate of conflict resolution in the University of Buea, Southwest region of Cameroon. I am here today to talk to you on the role of conflict resolution practitioners in fostering disability inclusion through technology. But before I set the ball rolling, permit me to unequivocally tell you that this exposition has been inspired by my own aspirations, experiences, reflections, reading, and of course, classes. Let us start with a brief background of the Anglophone armed conflict in Cameroon, because we are going to use it as a working example throughout this discourse. The Anglophone armed conflict in Cameroon started in 2017, leading to the outbreak of a humanitarian crisis. Since then, over 5,000 deaths have been recorded, with nearly 1 million people displaced both internally and externally. You want to know that this has resulted in the lack of access to basic services, and persons with disabilities have been among the most affected in the conflict. Now, this is not only the problem of Cameroon alone, but as elsewhere in the world where conflicts are abound, persons with disabilities have been among the most affected. Yet, nothing is being concretely done to ensure their full but meaningful participation in peace-building activities. Important statistics. 16%, that is 1.3 billion people world over, are living with one form of disability or another. That is according to the WHO 2023. Now, of this 1.3 billion people, a further 16%, that is 850 million people, have their disability caused by armed conflict. 80% of persons with disabilities in the world, that is 1,040 million people, have or are living in low and middle income countries. Now, in 2019, the United Nations Security Council adopted Resolution 2475, actually recognizing the disproportionate impact of armed conflicts on persons with disabilities. My dear peace builders, the question then is, how do we aptly ensure that persons with disabilities are actively involved in peace building, especially through the use of technology? That is the question I will be answering in just a moment. Now, in the first place, we need to ensure that we are intentional, very intentional about our inclusion messages. How should we be intentional? Now, you need to be empathetic. Empathy towards disability inclusion. We have gone past the era where disability was seen as a health problem, where disability was seen as charity. Now it's a human right approach where all of us are equal. Someone earlier talked on equity. That is what we now want to happen. Now, we also need to do this by respecting accessibility guidelines. We are talking about the Worldwide Web Consortium. We are talking about the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. If this is respected, then you can be sure that you are intentional about peace building being inclusive. We also need to ensure that our social media and post, that is our social media and blog posts, are inclusive. We can do this by making use of alternative text. For example, if I am posting on Facebook and my post is an image, how do I make sure that blind people access that information? You need to attach alternative text so that they can rely on that text, which more or less explains that image. If I'm posting on WhatsApp, how do I ensure that persons, which is an audio message, how do I ensure that persons with hearing impairment have access to that message? You need to attach alternative text. You also need to make your website, your organizational website, accessible by using accessibility checks to ensure that everyone can have access to information on your website. Now, another factor that we need to consider is to make use of scholars of conflict resolution with disabilities, like what I'm doing here now. I'm a scholar, I'm a blind person, I'm completely blind, and I'm here to talk about the cause of disability inclusion in peace building. Now, when scholars of persons with disabilities are included in peace building from the initial stages, it gives trust to the process. It helps other persons with disabilities to know that if our leaders are part of this process, then we need to actively involve in it. Do that, and I tell you that in the next couple of months, if not years, you would find persons with disabilities championing peace building processes. Now, another factor to consider is to fund research projects on the impact of armed conflicts on persons with disabilities, inclusive humanitarian actions, and peace building. Now, not much data is available of the situation of persons with disabilities vis-a-vis armed conflicts. I remember I once mentioned that persons with disabilities are the most affected in terms of armed conflicts. And my professors told me, my boy, you are wrong. Women are the most affected in terms of armed conflict. He's not wrong. He's talking based on the data that is available. And I had to use logic to make my point. I said, Professor, with all due respect, what about women with disabilities? We need to understand that research for persons with disabilities is very important, and funding such projects would help peace builders to have readily available information about the horrors of armed conflicts on persons with disabilities around the world. Another factor is that we need to promote the works of journalists with disabilities. Earlier this year, that was in May, I was invited by the Inclusive Africa Conference on Digital Accessibility team, that's Int'l, holding annually here in Kenya, and I was asked to talk on the role of the media in disability inclusion. I remember telling them during that conference that no one can tell our stories better than ourselves. We wear the shoes and we know where they pinch. I remember when I enrolled in the School of Journalism some years back, during my first lecture, a lecturer told me that, my boy, journalism is not meant for blind people. Even if the university was going to manage and graduate you after 6 years instead of the normal 3 years, you will not be relevant to the job market. I actually wept, but I did not drop from the program. Today, I can proudly tell you that blending journalism and conflict resolution is the best thing that ever happened to me. I also want to tell you that to ensure the inclusion of persons with disabilities in peace building, we need to also support organizations of persons with disabilities to implement projects on inclusive digital technology and also on peace building. This is not only providing capacity to those organizations, but more importantly, empowering their members. And before you know it, persons with disabilities are driving on the front seat when we are talking about peace building. Remember, they are the most affected in peace building, and so we need them on board. I remember that my master's thesis hinged on the impact of armed conflicts on persons with disabilities. That's impact of the Anglophone armed conflict on persons with disabilities, and people shared very horrendous experiences. Imagine on a university campus, gunmen invade, and everybody running helter-skelter, and blind people are trapped in nowhere. They don't know whether to go front, to go back. They decide to lie on the ground, and people have to work on them. A lot of them developing depression, trauma, and other mental health complications. Yet, they are not part of peace building process. My dear peace building stakeholders, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it is not an error that this presentation, this exposition is happening on the eve of the International Day of Persons with Disabilities, commemorated every December 3. It means that we must be intentional toward including persons with disabilities in peace building endeavors. Archbishop Desmond Tutu of South Africa once said, and I quote, "If you are neutral in situations of injustice, then you have taken the side of the oppressor." My dear peace building stakeholders, I am certain that having listened to me, most of you here want to support the cause of disability inclusion through peace building. Now, Build Peace is clocking 10, and I hope that this, very presentation of mine today should serve as a sine qua non, should open the floodgates for the peace building organizers or for the Build Peace organizers to start reflecting on how to get persons with disabilities become an integral part of this process. And to you, my dear fellow persons with disabilities, I challenge you all to utilize, to explore the tenets of the 2006 UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, to come out and massively participate in peace building, because to build inclusive bridges or to build communities through peace building, persons with disabilities need to be ahead, and we are ready. Thank you very much.